You know him as Dr. Trek, but how much do you really know about Larry Nemecek? How did he discover Star Trek? Why was he asked to create the Star Trek The Next Generation companion? And what is his reaction to the news that the Academy of Science Fiction, Fantasy, and Horror is giving the TNG cast a Lifetime Achievement Award? I've got the answers to these questions and more in my first interview of 2024. Me? Oh, I'm T. Rick Jones, and this is your Daily Star Trek News. So I guess my first question to get started, because I've never heard the story if you've told it, is how did you discover Star Trek and what about it appealed to you? Go way back
Okay.
to the beginning.
This is no. This is this is one thing I crystallize. No. I didn't run. I didn't control the TV. I had a 10 years older brother. I was a kid. I
Uh-huh.
would have been if I could have toddled over the TV and controlled the dial because we didn't have remotes. Um,
Sure.
I could and would have. I remember Lost in Space being on as a little kid and playing
Yeah.
that at recess, but not until I was like in junior high. And we had a first year science teacher right out of OU, and she was, and so always brilliant and starry eyed when they're right out of college, right? They haven't been
Yeah.
worn down, and and she was great, and she probably had about I say she had teachers' pets, but probably she had about 15 teachers' pets in a classroom. She was just like that. And one day, like in the spring of my freshman year, I just remember walking by her desk and a couple other students, both of them girls they were sitting around kind of giggling with her in an appropriate way,
Yeah.
and we were done at the end of the hour, and I said, "What are you all up to?" And I looked at them, and they all had like a Sharpie or a ink pen put blue dots right in the middle of their foreheads. And I'm looking at them. I said, "What are you all doing?" I said, "What are you, the Ajax blue dot cleanser man?"
Harriet, the Ajax turned blue.
And they were like, "No, Larry, we're Hawkins." And I go, "What?" And they said, "We're Hawkins." And I said, "What?" The Hawkins from Mirror Mirror, right?
Yeah. Uh-huh.
Okay. Uh, and they said, "We're Hawkins." I said, "What are you talking about?" And the words I will never forget. Mrs. Pollard looked at me. She said, "Oh, Larry, don't tell me you don't know Star Trek." And I was like, "Is that the show with the guy with the ears in space?" And because I knew that I was aware.
Yeah.
And she said, she goes, "Look, you need to go home right today, 4 o'clock, Channel 5. You need to watch it. Start watching it." And I'm like, okay. And for some weird reason, I knew enough. This made sense to my logic as a freshman. I said, okay, well, it's on Saturday mornings as a cartoon. So I'm going to watch it Saturday morning as a cartoon. And if I like it, then I'll watch the live action, which makes no sense at all because the live action would always be better than the cartoon ripoff version, right?
Sure.
But I did. And so I think the first Star Trek I actually watched, I had a memory of stumbling across it. I know this. A few months earlier, I had stumbled across on Sunday afternoon flipping channels. And yes, that was a thing we used to do, kids. And I had this vague idea, and now I know what it was. I stumbled into watching just for a few minutes, and I went, okay, and then I went on. But there was this like whirling colored energy ball floating along a corridor, and then right behind it was a guy in a blue and a guy in a red shirt. It's Day of the Dove, right? I know that now, which is weird because now I think the first actual episode I saw was an animated. I think it was Beyond the Farthest Star, I think.
All right.
And either that or one of our planets is missing. And then I went, okay, and then I started watching after school, and I can't tell you the first one I happened to see live after school a whole hour.
Yeah.
Except when I watched a whole hour after school, our local station would cut the teaser and cut even the voiceover. So they would go from the ding, you're
Uh-huh.
watching 5 KOCO TV in Oklahoma City. Da 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 da. I mean, they would cram in the commercials like all of them did in the 70s, where we didn't. It would skip to the even cut the voiceover and just go right to the theme. So you have like 10 seconds of theme and then another commercial and then come back. And it wasn't
Huh.
until I was in college and watching a superstation, and it was like, oh, there's that. That's what that. Like I'd see a scene in magazines and books.
Yeah.
Oh, that's what that's from. Oh, okay. I think even by then we had the concordance I kind of knew, but I saw these facts in the concordance I had no clue about. I was like,
Yeah.
oh, it's all this exposition stuff in the anyway. So that's
Yeah.
so there I answered. There's a double whammy for you. That was my first Star Trek, and you know what? And it took me a while to realize it. And even at times over the years, I quickly realized I was not a typical fan in
Uh-huh.
that when I started. I mean, the first time I went to a con a few years later in college, and an overnight convention, a real one.
Yeah.
I took all of my I took my tech manual, my medical reference, my making of Star Trek book, which like I had all the books, my
Yeah.
blueprints, my Enterprise blueprints, maybe even taken my Klingon blueprints by the. It's like I put everything, and you could put everything in one box that maybe like a stereo. I literally remember this. My stereo turntable came in, so not a big box.
Uh-huh. Right.
Everything that I had that was Star Trek background in it. I never bought the Blish novels because it was like, well, that's on TV. You know that. What do I need to read it in a book for?
Yeah.
And anyway, but that was where my head was working. And I thought we would all go and sit around and talk Star Trek, meaning if you're talking Star Trek, you're talking about background and now what we'd call canon and all that.
Right.
Or making of if you knew a little enough about it. And I got there and I was like, oh, we do not all sit around and talk about Star Trek A, much less Star Trek's background and making of. Okay, well, first lesson. So then I realized that the whole Star Trek world was built on Spock and Vulcan and the whole explosion of fan fiction and the zine editors. That zine editors were the core of clubs and conventions,
Yeah.
and that's where And then Star Wars happened, and that's where I was like, oh, okay. And then later on, I realized that I was probably at a 5% minority or 10%, but it was all good. It was all good. But that was kind of where I realized what I'm saying here is my first takeaway, the first impulse I had, instead of some people that went, oh my God, got to write the story about Spock and Amanda and Sarek that, didn't see on screen. And, you're taking our show away from us without finishing it. So I'll show you, I'll just make my own stories. I mean, that was I'll do my own Star Trek since you canceled it.
Right.
So while you were campaigning to get it back, you were also making your own. And for most people, making your own meant making more stories. And for some of us, a vast minority, it was filling in all the pages the tech manual didn't have. Or it was, organizing the stars and planets because they obviously fit some, pattern. And Franz Joseph didn't go far enough with this. Or the medical reference didn't go. Anyway, so that was so today we have we have world building and canon keeping and retcon, and before I called it that, I called it gap filling and canon smoothing, or canon smoothing later. But anyway, so that was what grabbed me first, and then later on, when I accidentally got the companion contract, is when I really leaned into making of. Like I always loved, but I was a kid in Oklahoma, and yay, thank you. The background work that I did, the canon work, got me the interview the makers end of things, and that's been knowing the road taken as well as the road not taken, and all of that. So that's what it is. And it took me until Leonard Nimoy died to realize that, and somewhere on a spectrum, to realize that I wasn't a humanist. I mean, I wasn't like above all of the beloved traits of Star Trek, why it's attracted most audience, like the humanity, the diversity, the future optimism, all of that was in there. I just kind of took it for granted. I took Gene at his word when he said, well, look, if we don't all learn to get along and we don't blow the world up or poison the earth and we don't blow up each other, we'll never actually live to the point where we can have cool adventures meeting aliens in space and learning about it. We won't have survived learning our own world, much less be entitled to meet others if we haven't met ourselves. And so to me, Star Trek was, well, yeah. It's like, well, yeah, of course we've got peace. We've all learned to get along somehow. It's like, well, that's a given. Now let's move on.
Right, exactly.
And I didn't self-examine that until way later when I saw people were like, but they're all equal and there's no racism and misogyny and what, Gene's thing about everyone and all the little children will know how to read, that. It was like, well, yeah. Okay, now moving on. And I realized that's where so many people lived, So and I was like, okay, I never meant to take any of that for granted. Of course, that's a vaunted part of Star Trek. It's just that my attention went immediately, not just to the cool, shiny stuff, but because I was always like, and I promise I'll take a breath. So my favorite two episodes of the original series, which was Star Trek for the first 20 years or 10 years for me, was just Doomsday Machine, just because of the music and William Wyndham and Decker, and I just the grippingness of that and the music. Everybody thinks of and how John Williams ripped Saul Kaplan off and all that. But my other was Journey to Babel, even though I had lots, Muck Time and City on the Edge and all that, yada, yada. But to Babel was the one time they showed Federation and politics and the other species interacting. And it was a very limited, way. But it's the only time I just remember as Star Trek blew up thinking, well, of course we love the Enterprise. And of course we love Kirk, Spock and McCoy and Scotty and the whole bunch.
Yeah.
But it's there's a whole world, a whole universe going on outside that ship.
You mentioned you accidentally got a contract to do the companion. So how did that all happen? How did you get tapped to do the Next Generation companion?
When we heard about Next Generation coming, it was at the same time as the first Macs were coming out, and desktop publishing was the buzzword, and laser printers. And I said, I'm going to start over, and I'm going to keep my own, basically my own concordance. I'm going to keep entries of things. No, this is me sitting in Oklahoma. No, I bought a 4-head VCR because they recorded cleaner than 2 heads, right?
Okay.
And on fast speed, so that when you paused, you didn't get the static lines. We're talking VCRs, kids, and VHS tape. And you could read something on pause, and starting then and until the end of Enterprise, which was a lot of change in life by then, but I taped every week from home, and I had a Mitsubishi, because they would do this. If you paused, it was like instantaneous pause. There was no back and forth. So if it would go to commercial and the bumper started, the da 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 da, going to commercial, I would stop and back up a few frames and basically recorded all those 18 years of Berman Trek without commercials, which made it a great aid. Even people that taped the show, you'd have to run through commercials and all that. But anyway, so I had this clear thing that but I did that. I got a Macintosh. I had a Macintosh Plus. I had a laser writer. So basically, I did my own. I had a Mac evangelist to tell me about FileMaker. And I started doing my own databases. Today we have Memory Alpha. You've got Mike and Denise's encyclopedia even. But before any of that, I was doing my own thing. I was doing BJO Plus, basically, my own way. And I didn't know what it would lead to, but I just wanted to start it. And I would talk to like Richard Arnold at cons, meet him. And he was like, well, BJO's supposed to be working on, and we're sending her scripts. And I was like, oh God, I wish I had scripts. But, he'd say, but she's not doing anything, so you ought to just keep her. So after a couple of years, I sent him a copy, and he tossed his cookies, because by then they had their writers' guides to start, but out of the gate they were generating so much background that the writers and their assistants couldn't keep up with it. All they could do was go, I think that was in Code of Honor or what, the battle. Yeah. And the assistant would go to the file and be flipping through a script trying to find something. So it was chaotic enough those early years without that. And after the first one, he was like, oh my God. So every year I would do an annual one and publish it as a zine and sell maybe 50, 60, 70 copies self-published. Wow. But it was laser printed, which was a revolution then. It looked just like it's been printed. And I would do like a limited number set of TNG1, TNG2, TNG. And after the first 2 or 3 years, Richard would get me the spellings from scripts of the made-up words that weren't real words, like planet names and character names,
that's
drugs, things, animals. And at first we did them I would write them out and he would send them back. But after that, and I would say, here's the episode. And after that, we'd just get on the phone. And he would take like an hour or so with me. And then the first time I actually was on vacation, he gave me, I got a tour from Richard of the sets. And we came back to the Hart Building for the first time. And he introduced me to 2 or 3 of the assistants, like walking by. And it was funny because he would say, hi, and there would be fans and other people come by all the time, especially if Richard was leading them around. Richard Arnold, now the late Richard Arnold, but was Gene's right-hand man, and problematic at times with people, I'll say. But in this case, he would introduce me to people walking by, and they would go, yeah, like to them, it was like, yeah, somebody, another one of Richard's tour people. But he would always say, this is the guy from Oklahoma who sends us the the writers thing every year. And then their eyes would light up. And it was like, oh, that guy, it was like, oh my God, you saved my ass with my boss every week. Like you saved me so much time. And I'm like, oh, okay. Which is like that perspective. I didn't know the other side of the, it was like, oh, and after 2 or 3 of those, I was like, oh, okay. Then it's like the writers at Next Gen are using my concordance, the writers and their assistants, to make their lives a little easier. And maybe the unspoken thing is here is like make less, continuity mistakes or be a lot more efficient. So then Richard said, Bijo's not doing anything with her thing. We should give your name to Pocket and tell them you should be doing it. And I'm like, yeah, you should be doing that. So that's what happened.
Yeah.
So after 5 years, they were very gun shy. Remember, if you were around then, Pocket was not doing anything official, the official licensed publisher. They were doing novels.
Right.
But there was no behind the scenes, in universe or making of either style.
Yeah.
And they finally commissioned a tech manual from Mike Akuda and Rick Sternbach.
Yeah.
Like in the 4th season, and it took a year for it to come out. And then they talked to me. And so I was going, hey, if it happens, I've got it all written. Here it is. I'll just collate the 5 years or 6, whatever, and put. Well, they got to me and said, okay, the good news is we want you to do this. But the other news is we've already talked to Mike Akuda about doing an encyclopedia, and he's going to combine Bijo's, and basically he's going to do it combined, not just a TNG. And I'm like, okay. But they want you to do a making of book. Can you do that? I'm like, okay. And then can you do it in 3 months? I'm like, yeah, exactly. My vision is the classic making of.
Yeah.
And I'm like, I'm in Oklahoma. I've not interviewed any of them. And the bottom line to me was, this cannot be something that's cranked out fast.
Yeah.
And that every fan that I know that it's like, oh, they just stamped Star Trek on this and it's crap, but they want us to buy it. But there's nothing here. It's like 200 pages and it's 5 pages of anything good. It's just filler. It's just crap they cranked out. It's like, that cannot be me. If my name is on it, it's got. So I went crazy. I kept my star logs. I kept my, magazines, books, everything that people had done one-off interviewing in.
Yeah.
I actually, the first edition, the first 5 years was actually endnoted. I just come out of grad school or been out of grad school a few. So it's all endnoted, which is very rare in Star Trek books, book days. But between that and then I did go out for 1 week where I learned so many lessons. I didn't know enough to get in sync with the show to know that when I went in the spring, I went on my deadline time, but they were still very much like 3/4 of the way through the season.
Yeah.
And this was 5th season. The world was not set up for documenting and nonfiction writers, and much less YouTube, much less the studio spending money on this the way it is now.
Yeah.
And it was like, we're doing a show here. Get out of here. It was like, I talked to Bob Justman, thank God, for 4 hours at his house. Mm-hmm. They set that up. But all the way things were supposed to work was so clunky that, and this, I could probably do a book on this, but basically there was no magic, open the gates, roll out a red carpet. Here's an official author coming to interview everybody for the first book about Next Gen. Yeah. It was like, I don't have time. I'll call you back later. We're all, we've got the hiatus in our sights and we're on a dead run to get out of here.
Sure. Yeah.
And just not just attitudes, but it's like, but this isn't like they're all doing their own thing. Nobody cares. Now, some people did, and they're like, I just can't. And I talked to people by phone. I talked to all the writers by phone later on, but I only had 2 or 3 live interviews. Finally, on the 4th or 5th day, and just some outright weirdness about even being on the lot. Like I was secretly a fanboy, going to rip off half of the
right,
studio.
Sure. Yeah.
I'm like, I've been vetted. I have been hired by your official, what. But in the long run, I realized, and then I got a delay when Leonard Nimoy was fighting licensing because they had let the Fruity Pebbles commercial go with Bonnie Berry.
Mister, a spark.
Well, he searched for something super chocolatey has led me here.
Must be my delicious Cocoa Pebbles.
Fascinating.
But yeah, everybody remembers that.
Yeah.
Was mad
Yeah.
that Paramount didn't intercede to stop that because he thought it was degrading to Spock's image and whatever. So he withheld his image approval. So when we finally did the book, what was the biggest highlight of the first 5 years of Next Gen? Spock coming on unification, right? Finally,
Right. Yeah.
find the big debate. Will they ever,
Yeah.
And I got 3 more months because they were trying to resolve that impasse with him, and they didn't. So in return for me getting 3 more months of a deadline, I had 6 months instead of 3 months. Even then, the first edition, the Unification Part 2, had no pictures of Spock. I know. And then after about 2 or 3 printings, they resolved it and put his pictures in. So you might have an old blue cover companion that has no Nimoy. Obviously, the companion, changed my life, really.
Yeah.
Brought us to LA. I came on a couple of trips every year at the end of seasons, and then we decided to move because I was really bumping my head on the ceiling in Oklahoma what I could do, and I didn't, and then life was exploding as Trek was exploding through the 90s,
So another volume I have by my side at all times is your stellar cartography, which
cool.
you did
Yeah.
several years later. I love that. So talk to me a little bit about how you, because it's mind-boggling to me how you put that together. How did you figure out where all the planets are, and how did you do that?
Well, number one, biggest thing of all is I'm standing on the shoulders there of everybody who came before me, basically meaning a couple of go rounds taking a stab at it. Even French, even of everything in the tech manual, the original Star Trek tech manual, Franz Joseph tried to do a basic stellar layout and start doing in the middle of everything else he was doing pioneering. And I was talking about those days when the concordance and the blueprints grabbed me.
Yeah.
My really first thing I did was organize the making of, because there is no index. And I retyped a guide. It looks a lot like a writer's guide, but I pulled sections out and organized it like by like phasers, deflectors, the Federation, parts of the ship. And then the second thing was I tried to make some pages that would fill in the gaps that were in the outline for the tech manual.
Yeah.
But really the huge thing was when I got Bijo's concordance and I saw all the stars and planets, and it struck me how there were a lot of real stars in there, right? Rigel, Capella, Arcturus, Altair, Alpha Centauri, and then all the fictional ones and the planets. But it just hit me. It's like, oh my God, there's so many stars, and they're also just someone needs to organize these guys. Well, I took the Franz Joseph outline, which is using the real galaxy, the basic form of the Milky Way, and finding where we knew by then where we were within the Milky, where Sol, our system, was in the Milky Way.
Yeah.
And I started and I did a complete system for that. Everything from the original series located, either trying to do it as either if it was an actual star, find where it was, and then if it wasn't, do all the fictional stars by story point and then orient that. But it was on his scale. After that, I wrote to Jeff Mandel. I wrote to the medical reference editor, and eventually it got passed around to, of all people, Jeffrey Mandel, who was in New York, and said, thank you. A lot of people have told me that star can't possibly be the Klingons' home system, but you're the nicest one. Everybody else is screaming about it in their letters. We're writing letters, right?
Sure.
So, and even long distance phone calling was way too expensive for college kids and people in their first job to afford, right?
Yeah.
So we started writing back and forth, and he said, I do a nonfiction zine. I'd love to put these, and I had done my charts and they telescoped and, the close stars and all. And he said, I'd love to put it in my graphic style and do it. And he did. And just as it was about to publish within everything else, the what became the Star Trek maps came along. He got pulled into that when the guy doing it was killed in a traffic accident.
Oh.
And but it was a much smarter scale that fit the ability of warp drive, because the Franz Joseph charts are on way too huge a scale in the galaxy. So everything I had been doing for 2 or 3, including like letter set rub-ons, like I have a poster, the original poster I did. There's probably thousands of individual letters that I hand rubbed on, back of a big white paper. But and then he did it as graphic boards for pages in a page format. And that blew me up. I was so excited to be published, when and it was like, oh, but he had some stars to fill out some sections, and he named a star Nemecek, and he's like, I hope but I didn't like the fact that he had like a Disney star and a THX 1138
Yeah.
star, and
Yeah.
like, you've just made these. I called them. I said, these are just patronage stars. You've just made them jokes, and this isn't real. We didn't have the term. It's not canon, and I was like, this isn't real. But he named one for me as a sop to losing, being not part of it.
Yeah.
Like, but so all my friends teased me. It was like, oh, Larry, show us your star. It was like, "Arr." But that's where my original business name was MyStar Press and MyStar Media. That's where it came from. Because I was like,
Oh,
to
okay.
show you. It's like I turned it around and I was like, yeah, there's my star. Like, go ahead and I kind of like, I owned it, I guess. That's it. But then when the Price episode, so that went along, but then very quickly Next Gen happened. Mike Okuda came up with the quadrant system for the Price to communicate big distance scales. And then within that, and they sketched out where the Klingons, Romulans, Cardassians, and the Borg are over here in the Delta Quadrant. And from that rough sketching and knowing where Sol really was, and doing that, and then locating the other real stars even better. Then Jeff Mandel came along at the end of Voyager and did the maps that were in astrometrics and made them canon. And then especially on Enterprise, when they were so close, because it was the first ship just going out slow, warp 5, everything had to be really, or in his mind, had to be scientifically there. And he started laying the groundwork for his book, O2, the star charts. And then with the foldouts. And then by the time 10 years had gone by, people were scanning those and putting them together to have one big chart. And that's when they came up with the idea to do stellar cartography, and I think they probably went to Jeff, and he didn't want to do it, but he wanted to be part of it. And because that's how Jeff and I met years later. By the time of me working on the book and being around the lot by then, during Generations, the end of Next Generation and into Generations, they had hired some more people in the art department. And I went up to get some things or do some research with Mike. And Mike Okuda said, Larry, someone I want you to meet. And walked over, and he goes, Larry, this is Jeff Mandel. And my jaw dropped. It was like all those years ago, we didn't even talk long distance because we were poor kids. We were students and couldn't afford long distance.
Yeah.
All we had done was write back and forth, which is great because now it's preserved. But it was amazing. It's like, 15, 20 years later, here we are meeting in person. And when he got the chance to work on the book, he had like 6 or 8 people help him do that. And so then stellar cartography. But it was weird how this thing that we had done as, I say kids, as college kids, and then years later, he's doing it on the show for real. And was such a disappointment to me.
Yeah.
Winds up being, and then doing all kinds of other things, just mainstream interviewing and I started off being a canon smoother and a gap filler. And then I became a chronicler of, the behind the scenes making of. And it was so cool to get to go back around to the cool days of the blueprints and the tech manual and the medical reference, and go back around and be able to do some retconning and some gap filling and make sense of a lot of things. If nothing else, I'm most proudest of making sense of the Dominion War and choreographing it. And but so really I inherited Jeff's database, but then still I had to update it for everything, like the last 3 years of Enterprise. And prime parts of the movie, the JJ movie. And then we got to update it in 2018, the first year. Now it needs a huge update now.
Sure.
But the good thing is, licensing, our friend John Van Sitters sent that at the beginning of Discovery, and you watch the first year of Discovery and Lorca's Ready Room with the war charts.
Yeah.
I've got slides where I combine them. And it's right. It's their graphic style, but they're using the layout and the whole thing. So it's awesome to be able to help be the latest in the line of people trying to organize all that and have it be consistent from show to show.
You've turned Star Trek. I don't know if this is the right term for it, but you've turned Star Trek.
Don't blame me. No, I'm.
No, you've turned it into a little cottage industry for yourself. You're doing all kinds of, like, you've got all these publications. You've got Portal 47, which I want to talk to you about. You've got TrekFiles. I mean, it's sort of become your life, right? As Star Trek is.
Well,
you're
that's
almost inseparable from Star Trek at this point.
Well, I will say, this is the other thing I'll say. I love getting introduced as like Larry the Trivia King. It was like, no, like I have a degree in theater, I have a degree
Uh-huh.
in journalism. I worked
Yeah.
10 years in real news. You know, I
Yeah.
mean, I didn't think about it in the time. It's like a lot of things you just go, and then after a few years,
Yeah.
you go, oh, you look back and you go, oh, I guess I took all the positives of Star Trek for granted. Like I
Yeah.
didn't get in them and sit in them. I just
Uh-huh.
assumed them and went on, and one of those kinds of, insights after a few years is I think somewhere the idea of, because I'm a fan and I would be reading,
Yeah.
I'd read the same pablum interviews over and over and over again. I would read the same interviews of the actors who we love, but it's like, did anybody talk to Fred Phillips?
Uh-huh.
Did
Right.
anybody talk to Irvin or Feinberg? The
Yeah.
prop guy on the originals. And it's like we need them as we've got bukus of recollections from actors. Do we have the paperwork? I know Bob Justman's talked, but has anybody got, Gene Kuhn died way too soon. He's lost to us,
Yeah.
So part of that was me being a fan, knowing what I wanted to see and what was fine, but what I never saw that I wanted. Now I knew by then that I was a minority, but still that's okay. It's like that minority is like me would want to know this. So part of this,
Yeah.
what do I never see? It's like when people talk about their diversity in seeing actors. It's like I never see myself on screen. I'm not comparing myself to people who are like fighting for social justice here, but it's a little bit of, it's a hint of that. It's like the other thing that I love is I used to go up to Steve Walker's Denver conventions because it was like in my mind like what a Star Trek convention should be, but it was like 12-hour drive, Oklahoma City up to Denver, but we
Yeah.
would do it because his cons were so good. The late great Steve Walker just passed
Oh,
a couple
wow.
years ago.
Oh.
But what they did in Denver for 20, 30 years, I think. But I remember that's the first time I got to see actual Star Trek people on stage with a big room.
Yeah.
It was Patrick Stewart's first convention. The weekend that Heart of Glory aired, he was the
Oh.
guest with DeForest Kelly were the two.
Wow. Yeah.
But I think it was when Jonathan was on stage, but I remember the sensation. People were doing Q&A, right? And people would ask various questions. And if it was a making of type question, I think it was Jonathan would say, you know what? That's a Herman Zimmerman question. Or you know what? That's a Michael Westmore question. Or you know what? That's a Dan Curry question. Or you know what? That's an Alan Sims prop question. Or that's a Bob Blackman question.
Uh-huh.
And after 3 or 4 or 5 of those, I was sitting in the audience going, then why aren't they on stage?
Right.
And that was kind of a similar, and it was like, okay, well, I know why, because, if it was up to me, I would throw TechCon and it would only be those people and we'd have 12 people attend and I'd go broke. And that's why. Now, it's changed a lot since then.
Uh-huh.
But
Sure.
that's where my impulse was coming. It's like, we all love the actors, but we're all going to hear from them from now till, Timbuktu.
Right.
It's like,
Yeah.
they're not the problem. It's everybody else who makes everybody who's baking the cake, and you're remembering the icing on top, and that's cool.
Uh-huh.
And I'm not denigrating the role of actors creating their characters.
No, of course, but
So what I was trying to get to there was, after a few years, I realized I would read interviews with actors again. No one is pioneering, no one's speaking out for the writers, much less everybody else down the line.
yeah.
But also some of the stuff was just not professional, or people would talk to somebody I wanted to talk to and not ask the specific questions that I wanted specific answers to.
Right.
And so somewhere along the way, I thought, somewhere between the magic, or people were just totally ignorant of the way, and I didn't know the way the industry worked. But I sure, that one trip, I sure learned a hell of a lot of how the industry worked.
Sure.
Like if you're doing 26 episodes a season, by the time you get down to about episode 20, all you care about is getting to the finish line. I mean, you're still doing the best work you can if you're on a show like Star Trek.
Sure.
I mean, I added to but the fact of being around entertainment, both actors and writer directors and creatives, like art people and visual effects, all, I had that DNA in me, although not on a Hollywood level, but I got the instinct. And somewhere along the way, I realized that I think the idea of being a trained, I have a minor in communications, but I worked in news. But being around actors and directors and writers, even if it's more stage than film, but still, but that the attitude and the courage,
Yeah.
somewhere between having a background of entertainment, theater, acting, directing, and journalism, and then being a fan. Like
Yeah.
I would see people communicating for us with one of those qualities, but not the other two, or maybe two of the qualities and not the third. And I thought, and I didn't think about them, but I think maybe what equipped me or made me good at this, or
Yeah.
made people want to trust me. And I know in the beginning that was a big thing. I wasn't a bozo. I didn't ask dumb questions. I was very specific, and I got where they were coming from.
Yeah.
And if somebody said something, I would like listen to what they were saying and go with that. Now, here's my list of 12 questions I'm going to ask you.
Uh-huh.
And so I mean, looking back, but also I was a fan, but I was a fan that knew how to channel it to meet people professionally and also answer the needs of what magazine or book I was doing.
And you've got this online presence that you call Portal 47. How did that develop?
Well, that was so two or three things there. I just told you about my passion for, but also I'm a big defender of the underdogs, which is why McCoy and Scotty, and especially McCoy, became my favorite characters. Not that I don't enjoy and appreciate Kirk and Spock, obviously, but they got all the attention early on.
Yeah.
That's why I've become such a big Tellarite fan of Andorians and Tellarites, and then Andorians finally got their due on Enterprise.
Yeah.
But it's like, hey guys, who's the only founder of the Federation we've never gone to the homeworld of?
Yeah.
Yeah. After all these years. So that's a streak of me, and you've just heard me go on now about remembering all the creatives, the background people, not the actors, yay, but all those people have as much or more to do with the show you see in the end. So my frustration, and then getting to know them and having a Rolodex of tons of people, like up and down the spectrum of contributing to the shows backstage.
Yeah.
And even security guards and craft service people who were, because if you were at Star Trek, chances are you were there whenever you came. The Berman era, especially, you tended to stay, and it was the same true of the Desi. I miss talking to those people today, obviously, but as whoever was still around to be able to talk to eventually was great. And so that whole thing about that passion for years, I had all that, and then when Star Trek went down in 2005, like no active, and then when the world started to change and everything went digital and everything big box and paper went away, and the world for me blew up out here in 2005. The Communicator had been bought out. Dan Madsen had been bought out by Decipher, and Decipher Games all but imploded. Some internal issue there. But Star Trek was canceled. Rick Berman's contract was up. The world thought that we were burned out on Star Trek. And everything that had been around for that I came out to LA on blew up. And I thought, well, I should get back into journal. I had never had to stop to think about anything else. And then people in journalism were saying, oh no, this is a wasteland because everything's going online and nobody, it's like, how do I pay rent? How do I do a mortgage? How do I, support my older family by then? But how do I do this? And the world was just kind of in chaos. And I was grappling for should I just go sell shoes now? What's supposed to happen?
Yeah.
And I eventually, and there were things still happening, bits and pieces, and it was that way with a lot of the Trek world. And and I said, well, I'll get on board with the new world. Just what's this online thing? What are we doing?
Yeah.
And basically, the world was saying, you know what? We're still writing the manual on it in the late aughts. We'll tell you as soon as we got it figured out. And I'm like, guys, I got to live now. What's happening? And even then, things happening. But finally, by 2013, 2014, 2015, I was guesting a lot on podcasts were starting to happen. And I was a guest on Trek FM with Chris Jones. And one day he said, the podcast with you are our most downloaded shows. And I was like, oh, well, maybe I should do that Sunday. But I'll wait until we have everybody's got one now. So I'll wait until maybe we have cameras and I'll do it on camera. And that'll be a different thing. Because I didn't want to just do what everybody else was doing. I wanted to find something new to contribute and not just pile on the pile.
Yeah.
And then I also came across an entrepreneur's coach. I didn't have a lot of money to throw into it, but basically said, whatever your creative thing is, we'll find a way to make a steady income out of it. Now, wife would argue with you and say, oh, really? This is a career? Really? We're rolling in the dough here? What, it's not quite what a doctor or a lawyer would have. And it's like, well, hon, I'm a little too late to go to law school now or medical school.
Right.
But the world was changing, and we didn't quite know, right? And then on top
Yeah.
of that, we had the subprime, crisis in 08, 10, 20. Anyway, it's been a long road getting from there to here, and it's still not there. So thank you for all of the attention and praise. 4047 is the way my coach helped me figure out my passion, and also my passion, my memories, my own archive, and my Rolodex of people. Because I knew I have this. Somebody helped me come up with this saying. I didn't invent it, but Portal 47 is for all the Star Trek fans who have no idea how much Star Trek they still have no idea about.
Yeah.
And coming up with a regular package to get that to people. And also on the other end, get a lot of people who have seldom, if ever, been recorded for their Star Trek contributions and had that, And it all happened right at the time. And I started with free conference call, and it started off as just phone audio calls. And within 2 or 3 months, they added screen sharing, slideshow.
Sure, yeah.
And then within a couple of months, they added camera. And this was 2015 and 2016. So way before the pandemic and the world went to Zooming, we were doing this.
Yeah.
And I was having to explain how this worked, and a lot of the guests didn't have webcams, and if they were retired, and it was, so some of the early ones are still just a slideshow with a voice. But that was my way of finally doing what I wanted to do, preserve what I wanted to preserve, serve fans with it, and then hopefully have some income from it. Because Star Trek is a franchise, and you can't just run off and you can do making of, non-fictional analysis work, but even and then there again, images are a licensed thing. So there's all the tricky. It's not like I'm just going to go out and be a plumber, or I'm going to coach somebody or be a teacher. If I'm going to work in the franchise, it's got to be by the book and by the rules, and not cross any lines.
It was just announced there's going to be a Lifetime Achievement Award.
Oh yes,
for the Next Generation cast, and I just wanted to get your thoughts on that.
Well, yay! I mean, who better? And the Saturn Awards are sci-fi, fantasy, horror genre.
Yeah.
So yes, of course, you should be doing that. And it's something as iconic. We still have Walter, we still have Shatner, we still have George, and almost everyone else from the production team has passed now. Andrea Weaver, who was the third season woman's costumer, is still with us because she was like 22, worked on the show, and she's awesome. She's another, that's the kind of thing that Portal 47 has brought to people.
Yeah.
But, as iconic as the original series was, and they were all kind of caught like deer in the headlights, right? With the success and the fame, and they were all icons, but couldn't pay their mortgage, like in the 70s and 80s. It's like, if I'm so famous, why don't I feel like it, kind of a thing. But they, not just icons, but they revolutionized so many parts of the business, from syndication to licensing and merchandise to, go down the line. And Next Generation spawned the rest of the, showed that you could have a sequel to a show that superseded in a lot of ways, or at least equaled the power of the original.
Yeah.
It showed that sequels didn't have to be just, bad sophomores. And went all those years, became iconic, spun off other franchise, but also did its own boom. Like the original series let George Lucas get the last of his financing to do Star Wars, and we had Star Wars, the sci-fi boom of the time. But think of all the genre shows that were there because of Next Gen, and then wound up competing with it, and with the start, Hercules and Xena and Babylon 5, and go down the line, of all the and X-Files even. I mean, the genre opened the door to those kinds of things. So, and the fact that they moved so many people 30 years later, the Picard season, A, that there's a Picard series at all, and B, the season 3, just revolutionized, the idea that, and it wasn't the first. I mean, we had, Hugh Jackman coming back again on screen, but as a series, small screen, all that. Anyway, so well deserved. Whatever they've done apart from Star Trek, it's that double-edged sword of, I want to be something more than the one thing I'm famous for.
Yeah.
And after a while, you make peace, no matter what else you've done, if you've been Professor X, or really that will always be the highlight of your career. You learn to stop running from it and embrace that, and say, you know what, a lot of people never had one thing to mark their contribution to the world. So take it.
Right.
But no, it's amazing. It's lovely.
Well, Larry Nemecek, thank you so much. If you're willing, I'd love to have you back to talk about TrekFiles more in
sure.
depth and other
Yes.
things. This has been fantastic. You're a delightful human being, and I
Oh,
really had a great time with this conversation. So thank you
well,
so much.
well, thank you so
Um,
much, man. And I've been following the site ever since its original creator founder started. So it's been a
Allison
great
Pitt.
handoff, and you guys do so much good stuff. So
Oh, thank you so
good on you
much. I
too. Yeah,
appreciate
thanks
that.
for having me. Yeah.
Yeah, no problem. Thanks for coming on. Want more videos like this? Join our Patreon for as little as $1 a month to get early and free access to our videos. Maintaining a website and making videos like this isn't cheap, and our Patreon supporters are the backbone of our mission to bring you the Star Trek news you need to know wherever you are. Your support not only helps us afford the hosting fees for our website and podcast, but also helps us pay our writers. Head over to www.patreon.com/daily Star Trek news to help us out.